A tissue membrane is a thin layer or sheet of cells that covers different parts of the body. So for example, the body itself is covered by the cutaneous membrane, which is also just known as the skin. Internal organs are surrounded by serous membranes, and internal passageways that lead to the exterior of the body are lined with mucous membranes, and your joint cavities have synovial membranes. So let's take a look at each one of these in a little bit more detail. So starting with our synovial membranes, these are the membranes that are surrounding the joint cavities in your synovial joints. And your synovial joints include the freely movable joints in your body. So your elbows, shoulders, knees, hips, those are all examples of synovial joints. And when we talk about the skeletal system, we'll learn a little bit more about the structure of those synovial joints. But the synovial membranes are the things that help to create a fluid-filled joint cavity, cavity surrounding your synovial joints. The cutaneous membrane is also just known as the skin. It's made of stratified squamous epithelium tissue resting on connective tissue. So the surface is epithelium, and that's the part of the skin that you touch. You're actually touching epithelial tissue. And then deep to that epithelial tissue is some connective tissue. The apical surface of the epithelial tissue is exposed to the external environment. So once again, that is the surface of your skin that you can touch with your hands. And the cells on the surface are dead, and so that's why your epidermis, it can kind of flake off, and that's part of its job. So part of its function is for protection and to protect kind of deeper structures in the body. So those dead cells are kind of sacrificial cells. It's okay if they fall off. And keratinized means that the cells are full of a protein called keratin. And keratin is a strong protein. It's the protein also found in your hair and your fingernails. And it helps to give your skin a little bit of strength to it. And as I mentioned, your skin helps to keep the stuff inside your body in and the stuff outside your body out. So it protects the deeper structures in your body from things like pathogens. Pathogens are things like bacteria and viruses and fungi that can make you sick. It protects from desiccation. Desiccation is just drying out or becoming dehydrated. So your skin helps to keep the moisture in your body as well. Mucous membranes, which are also called mucosae, line body passageways that are open to the exterior of the body. So think about anything that you could take something from the external environment and stick it into your body, and you would be touching mucous membranes. So for example, your digestive tract, your mouth. So if you stick your finger in your mouth and touch the inside of your cheek, you're touching a mucous membrane. And that mucous membrane continues all the way down through the esophagus, the stomach, and through the intestines, and coming out the other end through the rectum and anus as well. The urinary tract, so your urinary bladder is connected to the external environment by the urethra. So that's the tube that your urine comes out of. And those are both lined with mucous membranes. And then ureters are tubes that connect each kidney to the urinary bladder as well. The respiratory tract, so you're taking in air from the external environment. So your trachea, lungs, and mouth are all lined with mucous membranes. And the reproductive tracts are also lined with mucous membranes. So the vagina and the uterus are lined with mucous membranes. The structure of a mucous membrane is epithelial tissue is actually touching the passageway or the opening. So for example, in your stomach, when you swallow food, your food goes into your mouth, down through your esophagus, and into your stomach. The whole time the food is making its way through your digestive tract, it is in contact with epithelial tissue. Now, deeper into your body is a layer of connective tissue that's kind of supporting that epithelial tissue. And mucous membranes, as you probably could have guessed, the surface is covered with mucus. And that just helps to kind of protect the passageways. It also provides some lubrication so that stuff like food can kind of slide through your digestive tract a little bit easier. So the primary functions of mucous membranes are protection, secretion, so they might secrete things like mucus as well as some other body fluids and stuff like that. And absorption. So for example, your small intestines are where the majority of your nutrient absorption occurs. And it's mucous membrane that the nutrients are in touch with as the food is making its way through the intestines. Serous membranes, which are also called serosi, are surrounding internal organs in the thoracic and abdominopelvic cavities. So starting off, we've got the pleura, and you actually have two pleurae, one for each lung. You have a pericardium, which is a serous membrane surrounding the heart, and the peritoneum is a serous membrane surrounding organs in the abdominopelvic cavity. We'll talk about each one of these in more details when we talk about the different organs in the organ systems that they're involved in. So for example, we'll talk about the pleura more when we talk about the respiratory system. We'll talk about the pericardium more when we talk about the cardiovascular system. And we'll talk about the peritoneum more when we talk about the digestive system. Serous membranes are also made up of epithelial tissue laying on some connective tissue. And the key thing is that there are two layers associated with a serous membrane. The parietal layer is going to line the walls of the body cavity, whereas the visceral layer is actually on the surface of the organs. So for example, let's think about the pleura. So the pleura is the serous membrane that surrounds the lungs. The parietal pleura is going to be the layer of the serous membrane that is pushed up against the inside of the rib cage. The visceral pleura is going to be on the surface of the lungs themselves. Now, in between the parietal layer and the visceral layer, there is a kind of slippery fluid called serous fluid. And that fluid kind of acts like the oil in your car. It helps to reduce friction between adjacent structures. So think about your heart and your lungs. They're kind of all packed in together in the thoracic cavity. And so your heart is beating and your lungs are inflating and deflating. And if you didn't have those serous membranes, they would be rubbing against each other. And when two things rub against each other, you get friction, which causes heat and also wear and tear. So if you didn't have those serous membranes, then your lungs and your heart would, the friction would make both of them wear down really quickly. But thankfully you've got serous fluid, which provides that kind of protection and lubrication. So here's another picture that kind of helps to better show the relationship between the visceral and parietal layers. So in this example, we're looking at the heart and the pericardium. So you'll notice that the visceral pericardium is this part of the membrane that's on the surface of the heart. The parietal pericardium is this outer layer here. And this would be either up against the body cavity or up against some other kind of outside structure. In between the two, you have serous fluid. And so these two membranes can kind of slide across each other in order to provide that protection from friction.